Morning, everybody, and welcome to our March ICCON virtual call. My name is Tori Colburn. I'm the Midwest Conservation Agronomist with American Farmland Trust. I serve as the MC of these calls. Appreciate everybody being with us this morning. Before we get into today's content, as always, we would appreciate it if everybody would take a moment to put your name, your organization, occupation, and location into our chat, just so we have an idea who everybody is and where you're tuning in from. And then we will go ahead and move forward. I think we have a entrance poll. We'd like to go ahead and get that launched if we could. And then, Rachel, I don't know if I'll get to see those results or not, but whenever it's ready, we can go ahead and move to the next slide. There we go. Okay. Appreciate everybody doing that for us. Okay, so as usual, today we're going to have a presentation. We're actually going to have a couple presentations today, and then we will open it up for group Q&A. So if you do have any questions as we go along here, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We will be monitoring those and collecting those to ask to our presenters at the conclusion of our presentations. So following Q&A, we'll have some news from around the network, and then we'll open it up to the floor for anybody who has some announcements or any events that you'd like to share with the group. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started with our presentations today. So first up, we have Anna Morrow. She's the program manager with the Midwest Cover Crop Council, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about the Midwest Cover Crop Council's row crop tool and give us kind of a walkthrough, talk to us a little bit about the development of it and some of maybe what's on the horizon. And then we have Brett Roberts with us today, who's the Illinois State Agronomist with NRCS, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the cover crop mix guidelines through NRCS, some of the rate requirements, and some of the parameters around those. So with that, Anna, I think we'll pass it to you and let you get your screen shared and let you take it away.
Okay. There, it's going to let me share. I clicked the button too early. It wouldn't let me do it. All right. Can you see my screen now?
We can.
Okay. And this will just be a really informal walkthrough of the decision tool. So if there's any questions, I don't have my chat box open, but I'll try to watch that, but please feel free to interrupt. Before I forget, I wanted to make sure and invite you all to our terminating cover crops and planning for unexpected weather. That'll be next Wednesday at 9:30 Eastern, so 8:30 Central. You can register for that here on our website. But we're going to talk about the cover crop decision tool this morning. And you can find that by going to our website. There's a selector tool button up here or down here on these big 4 squares down here. And you launch that by clicking try the row crop tool. And I know Brett's going to talk more about this later, but we work in close partnership with NRCS so that our recommendations are in line with them. We try to involve extension, seed industry, soil and water, all the experts of cover crops within your state. So our decision tool is state-based. So Illinois will have all the same recommendations, and we'll just kind of walk through what's provided within the tool right now. So the only thing that's necessary to input in the tool is your state, and we'd like for you to select a county. And from there, you can just hit find cover crops and kind of see what the recommendations are. The reason that we ask you to put in your state and county is that we have the 30-year climate averages from NOAA kind of running in the background. So each county in your state has a different seeding date recommendation for these different species. So I'll just show you, this is a slide from the back of our decision tool, kind of the guts of how it runs. So this is forage turnip for Illinois, and you can see, the list of different counties here. We have actual weather data in the background here that kind of shifts those growing seasons to actually, reflect the growing conditions on average for your county. So you can see, some have an earlier spring or later, and some of our seeding date recommendations go later into the fall versus earlier. And that's all run by frost data. So that's, I think that's kind of the biggest feature of our tool. There are some other decision tools out there that are not as specific on, climate data and those seeding date recommendations. And as we know in the Midwest, how late can I plant it is usually the first question that farmers have. It's really a challenge. So that is why this state and county is so important in the decision tool. Second, we try to always tell farmers to choose their cover crop based on their goals, right? You don't just go out and plant something just because. So you can select up to 3 goals here. So I'll just pick some kind of general ones: erosion fighter, nitrogen scavenger, soil builder. And these come from the SARE Managing Cover Crops Profitably book that came out quite a while ago. And so kind of the definitions for those come from that publication. So you can choose up to 3. And then if we scroll down, our cover crops are rated by those goals. So anything that sorts out as an excellent, scroll up, we've got 4 is excellent, 3 very good, 2 good, 1 fair, 0 poor. So all the excellents sort out to the top here. And then you can see by hovering over each of those ratings, you can see the ratings for each of the individual goals. And then as you scroll down, it gets less and less highly rated. And we've designed this tool to be a learning tool. So we really encourage you to, click different buttons and look back and forth and try to kind of just increase your knowledge by looking at the tool. What we didn't want this to be is something where you input all your information, you put it into a black box, and it spits out one answer. So I think it's a really nice way to kind of just learn about cover crops and kind of see some differences between them. So the next option that we have is cash crop options. This only serves as a reminder that you have a cash crop growing in the field. So I'll just put in some information here to show you that what this does is it puts a kind of a block over the calendar, this gray bar, as kind of a reminder that, hey, you have a cash crop in the field. If you're looking to seed a cover crop, you're going to need to do some type of interseeding. So you can see with our traditional corn and soybean rotation, there's just not a lot of time for several options on our cover crops. So again, that cash crop options is just serves as a reminder that there's a crop in the field. The next option are drainage, soil drainage options. So I think of this in terms of if you have a really tough spot, a field that you really have some challenges with, this is going to help guide you on some cover crops that are going to be more suitable for those fields. So let's say you have a very poorly drained soil. There's only a couple of options that really would suit those soil types. Most of the cover crops are not going to do very well. There's only a couple that are kind of going to have a fair amount of success in those situations. Once we've also got tile drainage options. So if you do have tile drainage, you can click that and you'll see it's like magic happens. We've got lots more options, right? So this is another learning opportunity where a farmer can say, you know, if soil drainage is a problem, maybe tile is the next investment that I want to make. Really makes a difference. So that serves as a way to kind of bump our soil drainage class up and give us more options in terms of cover crops. And then we've got flooding options. And again, this is just if we've got a tough place in the field, this 7-day time frame comes from SARE, managing cover crops profitably. So if we've got kind of a tough spot, there are a few cover crops that we would recommend over the others, right? Nothing's going to thrive under those conditions. But if you're working in a tough situation, we've got a few recommendations that might do better than others. So again, we can just compare, you know, very poorly drained, we've only got a couple options. If we move up to poorly drained, we've got 3. You can see just as our soil drainage improves, we've got more options there. I'm going to remove these goals real quick. And then another feature since our latest update is the displaying the cover crop type. So grass, legume, broadleaf, and then grouping them by type. So if you know you want to create a certain mix, if you're looking for a grass cover crop or a legume, you can kind of clump those together so that you can kind of compare the differences in those species. The final thing, and I worry that it's maybe overlooked sometimes, is that we have these information sheets. So you'll notice that each of the cover crop species is a link. So if we click on any of those species, we can find out, you know, what is the information that we put in the decision tool. This is where our goals would be listed. Here we've got planting information. So here's where we find those seeding rates and drilled seeding depths, termination information, performance and roles, cultural traits, potential advantages, and potential disadvantages. So we take a lot of time to comb through these ratings. They're all comparative. So we've got that excellent, very good, good, poor rating system, just like on the goals. So you can compare different species for some more detailed attributes that you might be looking for. You know, heat tolerance, shade tolerance, different disadvantages, those types of things. So that's something, you know, Brett is fully aware of how much time it takes to go through and compare each of those cover crops and say, you know, what would be the best under these conditions, or how do they compare? And then there's always some information that doesn't quite fit into the box that we have. So we've got these comments. And again, these are for each of the different categories. And they really provide those extra details that we might not have, you know, room on the information sheet for a rating. But as we discuss these cover crops, it comes up as, you know, a farmer really needs to know XYZ about these cover crops. So that's where those comments come into play. So this is a wealth of information, and sometimes it may be overlooked just because it's, you know, a little bit hidden. So that's the decision tool. With that, I think I'll stop sharing unless there's any questions over the tool.
Do we have any questions?
Hopefully it's pretty straightforward. We try to make it pretty simple so it's easy to use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're ready to pivot to Brett. Anna, do you have anything else you want to get through before we would pivot?
I don't think so. Feel free to, you know, follow us on social media and our listserv to stay up to date. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll have some Q&A for you here in just a little while. Okay, now I think we'll go ahead and pivot to Brett Roberts, the Illinois State Agronomist with NRCS. So Brett, if you want to go ahead and get your screen shared, if you have any difficulty with that, I think we can help you out. Yep. There we go. And then if you want to just come off of mute so we can hear you, and we'll let you take it away. Yep, we just need you to go into slideshow mode. There we go. And then you're still muted, so we'll just need you to unmute yourself
Yeah,
on the
we
Zoom
got it.
screen. There
All
you
right.
go. Okay. Thank you, Brett.
You
Take it
bet.
away.
I've been asked to visit with you a little bit about cover crop mixtures, and I just wanted to make a few introductory comments about the nexus between Illinois' conservation practice standard and the Illinois selector tool. When the selector tool first came into existence, it was developed in Michigan State for Michigan, and this was way back when interest in cover crops was emerging. So it goes back a little ways, and the Midwest Cover Crop Council is a large number of researchers who've devoted research time and to investigating cover crops. Back from ARS, USDA ARS was publishing research on the effectiveness of cereal rye in keeping nitrates and lowering nitrates out of tile line, which we all know is a serious water quality concern here in the Midwest in our tile drain systems. So that got my interest quite a bit. We really need to be offering the practice in the state of Illinois in our cost share programs, because the tile drained watersheds, nitrates are a serious concern, and this is a tool that we can offer to farmers to help lower those tile nitrate concentrations. This was way before we were talking about soil health and live roots all year long. So this even predates all that effort. And I knew for NRCS's standpoint that I needed to reach out to a cadre of other professionals to get guidance and to put forth our cover crop list and seeding rates. And about simultaneously with that time, I got a call, an invitation from the late Mike Plummer, that he had just organized a group of professionals that are dealing with cover crops in an effort to develop the selector tool, the first version of the selector tool for Illinois. And so from that effort, here in Illinois, I've adopted whatever we came up with in the selector tool for seed rates, seed species for Illinois. The reason I chose that route was simply because with the emerging interest in cover crops from various organizations, and then different cost share programs have emerged, starting with some USDA programs, but we all know the different opportunities that are out there from different organizations to put cover crops out. So I wanted us to use kind of a centrally, I didn't say located, source of information where farmers can go, professionals could go to learn about cover crops and learn about the individual species and the advantages, disadvantages, seed rates, planting dates. That with all the organizations out there, I thought, well, we kind of needed a common place to provide recommendations to farmers, because we all know when farmers are considering adopting a new practice, if they get so much different information or potentially conflicting information, it might discourage them from even trying it on their farm. And it also might give them information to avoid some mistakes and at least have a chance at success, for them to evaluate whether it's a good practice for their farm. So, in other words, to avoid confusion from multiple sources of information, and the fact that the informal group that was formed by Midwest Cover Crop Council to work on these selector tools, I just felt it was a good way for us to proceed in Illinois sort of seamlessly throughout the various entities working in agriculture in the state and promoting cover crops. So it was more from a chance to be seamless about our effort to promote cover crops and hopefully make farmers successful. And we reiterated into the current version of the selector tool, and we followed the same process again that Anna described, for developing the information within the tool. So we modified seed rates. The experience that we had over a decade or so suggested lower seeding rates were working okay, and that we didn't need as much seed as we originally thought. So that's what experience does and farmer innovation does throughout that period of years. So it's taught us a lot. So NRCS in Illinois, or at least it was my decision as the state agronomist, to work in tandem with the Midwest Cover Crop Council and the development of that selector tool, because it has not only seed rates, which everybody is the shining piece of metal to gravitate towards, but it's all the other important information such as seeding dates and all the wealth of information from the individual species. So that's a real brief history of why there's a nexus between NRCS's and our state conservation practice standard cover crop and the use of the selector tool. So it helps planners both within NRCS or outside of NRCS develop good recommendations for their farmer customers, and that's what we're all about here, is to get cover crop adoption, and we have to do that with helping farmers be successful. So, plus it allows us to change over time as we learn new things. So that's in a nutshell of how NRCS in Illinois and the Midwest Cover Crop Council just kind of came together. Some of it was coincidental, and we've proceeded forward with kind of that partnership since then. And I still think it's a great idea for us and for our state. So we hear about mixes, and why would we consider mixes? Sometimes simple is the best way to go. When we talk with farmers that are trying cover crops for the first time or don't have much experience, we don't typically recommend complex mixes for them to try. We want to start simple, and I think many of you have seen some of the publications that have come around from other like Extension and Midwest Cover Crops and others about when people are starting out with cover crops, how they might want to take and be very simple at the start, say choose a species or two, and not worry about cocktails, as the term sometimes is called with mixes. So why would we? Maybe because we have a broad set of goals that one species won't fully address. We talk about functional groups some, whether it's cool season broadleaf, warm season grass, that type of functional group. We use that a lot in our planning. We would choose mixes possibly because we want to create some diversity in our cropping systems, both above and below ground, because with the soil health considerations, we're thinking about root systems more than we ever have, really. And we have to face the fact that in our agriculture in the Midwest, corn and soybeans technically is a crop rotation, but they're so similar, being warm season, summer annuals, that we have a lot of similar problems, say like with weed resistance and so forth. So, we know rootworm is not immune to a corn soybean rotation, which that used to be a good way to control or manage Western corn rootworm. So we're trying to introduce diversity in our cropping systems where there isn't much. Another reason to mix cover crop species is looking at the ratio, or the carbon to nitrogen ratio, of the cover crop residue once it's terminated. We know that when we get a lot of high carbon residue there, that it can interfere with nitrogen availability, even planting, depending on how planters are set up. So we might want to have residue that breaks down a little more quickly in the mix. So another reason is to hedge risks associated, say, if one species, the weather or conditions doesn't favor the establishment of a single species. So you've got to hedge against risk with other species in the mix. So, and there's many reasons to put cover crops out. There's many reasons to consider mixtures too. Do they always perform well as just a single species? There's studies out there now looking at the cover crop mixtures and how they perform. A lot of the theory about mixes and species mixes came from like perennial stands or natural stands that have perennials, say like prairie, about diversity in prairies. They tend to have diverse they are, and we're finding that with annuals like cover crops, we don't necessarily see that to be the case, that if you have 2 or 3 species, that the biomass will be, it'll out yield biomass wise than the well-adapted single species in mix. And we find that that's not true in many cases, but there are reasons. And so that's the kind of thing. What do we want to achieve with our cover crops? When we need to start with that question when we decide to do cover crops to begin with. And what are some of the other considerations when we're thinking or considering mixes? And this is just a few of them just because of the time we have, but the most obvious one would be, if I put a bunch of species together in a mix, am I going to be able to put them at, say, a correct depth with the planting equipment that I'm planning on using? If I'm going to put a bunch of species in a mix, is there going to be enough time for those components of the mix to establish and grow and benefit us within the available growing time, considering the fact that most of these seedings will be done in the fall after corn and soybean harvest. The other thing is, when we pair species together, how aggressive are individual species? And I'll talk maybe a little bit about that in a minute. The other thing, obviously, is the termination strategy. are you going to be able to get a mix terminated well? If you're using crimping, are you going to be allowed to, are you going to be able to allow most of the species to get at a growth stage that they'll crimp well and not interfere with timely planting? Are you going to use tillage? And then, of course, herbicides. If you're got a species mixed, you're generally going to have to tank mix a number of different herbicides in there to get a good kill, and probably than just relying on glyphosate alone. Obviously, when you add mixes, put mixes together, you have the cost. And the final thing I'll say here is if we're planning on grazing the cover crops, what are the feed qualities? So if we're going to have a very brassica heavy stand over winter, when you start grazing, you might have to feed a little dry hay if it's brassica heavy in terms of the stand you get. So in other words, we need to look at the impact on the animals that we're feeding. So that's another consideration. So when I talk about mixes and how you put mixes together, we proposed sort of a rather simple way of doing this. There's drawbacks to it, but for simplicity's sake, for most people, a simple method of figuring out a mix will do okay. The way we do this and what I have displayed, that's our list of cover crops in Illinois. If you look at our tech guide, you'll see this chart, and it's identical to the species and seeding rates that's in the Illinois cover crop selector tool as well. If you see there's seeding rates and we have a column, the first column is the full seeding rate. So if you're going to just say the top on the list, if you're going to plant barley and that's all you're going to do, one species, then the seeding rate you should look to use is between 30 and 90 pounds. And that's a wide range, but you have to decide like for your purpose. Okay, if I'm going to plant barley and I want it for feed, then I would probably use the higher seeding rates towards the higher end, because the thicker the stand, the thinner the stems are going to be, and that would impact feed quality. Okay, if I'm looking at it for a cover crop, then I don't need to go clear up to that higher end of the range. And as far as the stands we get, the research is kind of showing that we get acceptable stands at a fairly broad range of seeding rates to a point. There's a point where you can't lower the seeding rates much more and get any kind of stand at all. So that's where the art and science comes in, and experience from deciding locally what seed rates that we would recommend. But for designing a mixture, if we start first by looking at the full seeding rate of each species that we want in a mix. So I'm going to look at here an example, and let's just try a very simple mix with cereal rye and hairy vetch. And then we're going to assume that we want, for simplicity's sake, equal proportions of each species, at least with respect to the seeding rate. And you'll see we start with the full seeding rates of the individual species, and I have them typed there for cereal rye and hairy vetch. So we wanted equal proportions of each. We would just simply take the full seeding rate and multiply it by the percentage desired. So in this case, 50%. So we would put a mix together for these two with 15 pounds of cereal rye and 7.5 pounds of hairy vetch, pure live seed per acre. So you can see that's a simple way of coming up with a mix. One of the drawbacks of using, say, pounds per acre when you're dealing with these different species, we use pounds per acre as a recommendation seeding rate. But the problem with that is that you got pretty wide disparity in seed size. So the number of seeds per pound is very unequal amongst the species. So if you take a big seeded species like Austrian winter pea versus, say, a turnip, if you put those seeds side by side, you can see that they're very different in terms of seed size. So what you're dealing with planting depth and things like that is why. And then, a pound of barley is not going to have as many seeds per pound as a pound of turnips. So, if you really wanted to get down into the weeds about planting mixtures, you'd look at seeds per square foot. So if you wanted a total of 30, 40 seeds per square foot, then you'd plan your seeding rates like that. And you'd have to know how many seeds per pound of the seeds that you're buying. But this is a simple way because not everybody's going to have that kind of information as far as the number of seeds per pound in the seed lot they purchased. Um, another uh, another simple mix would be cereal rye and radishes. So here we've got we wanted the radish tubers uh, to go deep into the soil, and then our cereal rye with a fibrous root system that roots a little closer to the surface. Um, and the radish will winter kill. So in this case, we could terminate our cover crop in the spring by just using glyphosate. We wouldn't really need to tank mix another herbicide to be able to fully control cereal rye. So the same exercise, and the reason I brought this up when I mentioned about aggressiveness of the different species, it just turns out in this example, we have a 2-pound seed rate for this mix for the radishes. And honestly, when you're planting a mix with things like radish that can be very aggressive, assuming you're planting these things at a date, at a time when they're all going to be able to grow and establish before it gets cold. I mean, we're wasting money putting radishes in a seed mix that we're not going to get planned realistically till, say, like November 1. So those seed dates in the calculator are actually pretty doggone important. And the last thing I want to say, experience has taught us that radishes, when they get going, they can really be aggressive. So in a mix, we'd never want to put more than 2 pounds of radishes in a mix. And again, that's what's been learned from experience. So you could easily find a rye and a radish seed mix, and all you see out there is radishes. So that's the thing. Sometimes radishes don't play well with others. So that's really all I had to say as far as the math magic around developing mixtures. It was designed to be simple. Nothing needed to be complicated. In my view, we wanted to make it simple so farmers that are experimenting possibly with mixtures on their farms might have an easy way to go about it. So that's all I had about mixes, because we've really put no more difficulty in, at least from NRCS's perspective and for participants in our cost share programs, just to make this as easy as possible to plan.
All right. Well, thank you, Brett. I think we'll go ahead and move to our Q&A session now. I'm gonna first question, I guess, is for Anna. And actually, Anna, I'm going to combine two questions into one. So the first part is how can somebody provide feedback to the Midwest Cover Crop Council's tool, and then along with that, let's say we get to the point where we're going to add some species to the tool. What does that process look like, and how might somebody suggest doing that.
Yeah, if you have suggestions or see, typos or something's gone wrong, please email me. My email is on our website, and my phone number. Um, I'm always interested in suggestions. We've done some background updates to the tool to where we have a few more capabilities. Um, and so I try to keep kind of a running tally of what the suggestions are. And obviously if there's a typo or a mistake, we get that fixed right away. But other than that, if we're looking at adding a species or changing a seeding rate or seeding dates, anything like that, we really focus on consensus recommendations. And part of the process of updating the decision tool is not just to have good information at the end, but it's also to develop professionals in the process. So when we look at revising recommendations in the tool, it's kind of a big undertaking. We get in touch with our state contacts. We kind of develop a team of experts. We try to get together in person to build that network. And then we have a series of like 3-hour long Zoom calls to go through all of the, what species do we add? How do we need to change dates and rates? And we try to get the whole state represented and different industry extension NRCS, just to get a good collaboration and diverse input. So it's not something to where, well, one person suggested we add the species and we just put it in, or we copy from another state. It's a really involved process so that we're developing professionals at the same time as we are, creating these recommendations. And we really do want them to be, strong recommendations, conservative enough that farmers are going to be successful, even if it's a tough year, weather-wise. And they can feel confident in those recommendations. So it's a pretty big undertaking. We like to review the whole state at one time. There have been a few exceptions, and Brett is one of those. Like, he contacted me and said, we'd really like to add winter camelina, and so we kind of held a extra, a special session where we just looked at adding camelina and didn't go through the whole state. So there are some exceptions like that when we want to make sure that we're in line with NRCS. But in general, we try to get good consensus because soil types are different, weather is different, different production systems, all of that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I would just put a plug in for anybody that hasn't done any consulting work in other states, in regards to NRCS programs. A lot of them, I think we're really lucky in Illinois that we really depend so heavily on Midwest Cover Crop Council and use that as our standard, because I've done some other work in other states where there is no standard, where they may point to multiple conflicting resources. So it's really the Wild West. So I know of a lot of county level NRCS and soil and water guys that have basically that chart that Anna showed printed out, so they can look while they're at their desk and see what all the dates are for their county for cover crops. So it's very helpful to have that in Illinois. We got a question in the chat from Eric, and Eric, I might need you to come off mute, and if I screw this up, kind of what you're getting at. So Eric's question, I would think probably for Brett, is how do we get Illinois to recognize multiple seeding dates for additional species in conservation programs like EQIP? Eric, do you have any clarity for that? Are we talking about like a multi-species mix? Is that what you're wanting?
Yeah, basically so that growers, when they're, say working with programs like EQIP, and then they're having to add additionality to the program to maintain the EQIP program, we see, they need to add something like rapeseed, but a lot of times that seeding date is so early in October that doesn't correspond with harvest. And Illinois is such a long state. Even if we could have something like federal crop insurance, that's represented by some different zones in Illinois. Why don't we have zones in Illinois, like for the EQIP programs? I mean, we've got the great tool like the Midwest Cover Crop. Why don't we have county-based recommendations as opposed to whole state-based recommendations.
And maybe Anna, you can chime in there, but I think my read of the question at least is, so when you go to the Midwest Cover Crop Council tool, you are putting in your county, and that will change those dates, not significantly a whole lot. And I think I agree with that challenge. Like, there's a lot of times when a grower wants, because the payment's a lot better for a multi-species overwintering mix, for example, but your options are almost non-existent to actually add another species. And so, especially in some of these areas that, harvest may be late, we're looking at late maturity crops, or the capacity isn't there to get that cover crop planted. Brett, I wonder if you could speak to just the role of variances and on-farm trialing. I know that NRCS has a lot of creative language and funding around if a grower wants to do say a date trial for something that's maybe a little newer, like camelina. How would a grower go about doing that?
Well, they can try it on their own and then just show us, or they could ask for a variance to plant it earlier or later or something like that. We can, tentatively approve the variance with stipulation, hey, we're going to go out there and evaluate it and see how it works before we consider, making a permanent change in the seeding rates. We will want to see how it performs. So there's that opportunity. And I would just add that, the specificity in planting dates is already in there. Okay. And it's based on a recent, 30 years of frost-free dates. So there's the programmatic administrative things, additionality, but the cold hard reality is that, yeah, it might work on paper, but are you really going to get any growth out of that species to make it even possible to achieve any benefit from it? So there's theory and practice. So it at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you're planting. If you don't put it in a field, assuming that there's moisture at a time where it can grow and actually establish itself and achieve the goals of the species, the reason why you're putting it there, then that's what's most important. I'm just going to add another species because I like the payment rate. Well, if you can put viable species in a mix and they'll work for your latitude in terms of seeding dates, then that's fine. But if we're putting species in, we want to get our cover crop planted and we're pushing on November 1 in northern Illinois, and to think that we're going to put a winter killed species out there and get any growth out of it before it dies, I mean, it's just not realistic. So there's a point where we got to take theory and practice and put them together. And, that's kind of somehow we get distorted on the agronomics of things just because of program payments. And so we got to start with what works. And that's what's likely to work.
Brett, what does that look like at scale? Because we farm, 1,000 acres or so and have a pretty well-established program, and say we wanted to try something. But I think, you've also got operators like Eric at Align IFS, where they have a pretty substantial cover crop drilling program that, as of last year, was covering, almost 8,000 acres. They've got a pretty big region. It's a well-defined region, and they say, okay, we want to try this out on our acres. Like, who do people go to for some of these questions if they have a variance or they want to try something on a larger scale in a region, just to nail it?
Field offices would go to their area and they would propose it to us at the state office, and then I'll look it over. And then I will, the state resource conservationist, which is my boss, that's the person who approves variances. Okay. A staff person like me, hey, I highly recommend us. Let's take a look at that. And then, we have approved variances for doing different things on cover crops. Okay. We didn't even have winter camelina listed a few years ago. And then we approved variances for people to go out there and use winter camelina. And then we went out there and looked at it. I mean, the field office did, took some pictures and looked at establishment, and we didn't waste a whole lot of time proposing that winter camelina would be added to our list, because it gave us a chance to put a brassica out there at later planting dates than what we would with, say, radishes. So that's what we've done with variants in
And Brett,
Illinois.
can you clarify
Um,
for me, are there different seeding dates for cost share across the state? Is it by county? Is it by state
no,
or different
No,
regions?
the
What do
cost share
those seeding date
program's got
deadlines look
nothing to
like?
do with it. I mean, this is our standard is program neutral. Our practice standards have nothing about EQIP or CRP or CSP or anything in the language of those practice standard documents. Okay. It's just criteria for achieving the objectives of the practices, the reasons why we're even doing the practice. So, with each practice, like, for example, cover crops, we're using the seeding dates based on recent climate that's in the selector tool.
So growers can use the MCCC seeding dates for their county.
Yes. Oh, that's what
For
we
cost
want
share.
them to
Okay.
use. That's exactly why we
So it's a
wanted
county level,
so that they get
for
it
cover
at
crops.
county level. And you know, an area might, like you said, there might be organization cover, multiple, a fairly large region. Now, is that region large enough to have a lot of variation in it in terms of planting dates, seeding dates, growing season, essentially? Uh, Maybe there is a lot of variation in their area or not, but if you go to the specific county where you're planting the seedings, well, then that's as close as you're going to get site specific. Okay. There's quite a bit of difference between northern Illinois and the southern tip of Illinois when it comes to rainfall and growing season. This is a very long north-south state. And so there's a lot of difference between the very north and the very south. So it is kind of imperative that we use localized information when it comes to our growing season and whether or not, some species would be suitable at certain planting dates.
Brett, I think you just said it right there, though, that, Illinois is such a long state with very, very different growing zones. But sometimes when we see these additionalities of when growers need to add additional species, we only see one planting date for the entire state. How the programs are written and everything. And some of these species will adapt in certain areas of the state beyond the predetermined planting date. And so that's what I'm just trying to get at is how can we work with the state of Illinois with these programs so that way we can have, say, even if we just had 3 zones, I think 3 zones would come a long ways as opposed to just having 1 zone for the entire state of Illinois, which often is from my experience, is sometime in early October. And a lot of times crops aren't even harvested by early October.
Yeah, I mean, when you got seeding dates by county, there is no zones. We don't have just one zone for Illinois as far as seeding date. So, I mean, the zones are essentially each county.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and get things wrapped up. We're kind of at time here, so I think I want to just thank Anna and Brett for joining us today. There's a lot of questions around a lot of this stuff, and I could ask a few more, but I don't think we have time. So I think we'll go ahead and get things wrapped up. Rachel, I'm going to pass it to you. We have a slide that we want to share just with some news from around the network, and then we'll open it up to the floor if there's any additional announcements.
Yeah, thanks, Tori. Hey, everyone. I'll drop a bunch of these links in the chat, but just wanted to plug some events happening around the network. American Farmland Trust is hosting Women in Ag events, and these are focused on soil health. They're like soil health sessions just to talk about soil health goals and things like that on farms. And the next one is coming up on March 20th in DuPage County in Carroll Stream. Um, there's also the National Cover Crop Summit. That is a 3-day long virtual summit where it's just all different things about cover crops, agronomics, storytelling, a whole host of cover crop enthusiasts are a part of it. So that sounds like you could be a good opportunity. And then we also have ISAP is hosting a practitioner's guide to advancing conservation drainage practices, and that'll take place in Urbana, Illinois. It's tacked on to there's a drainage conference that's happening from, I believe it's the 1st to the 3rd. And so this is kind of looped into all of that. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'll drop those links in the chat as well. And then finally, we are planning a field day from farm to filtration. It's a tour of conservation in action, and that'll be April 3rd in Bloomington. We'll be doing 3 different site visits for the field day, starting at Davis Lodge in Lake Bloomington. So stay tuned for some more information about that. And we really would like to personally invite the ICON group to come offline, and we can all kind of convene during April and learn some more about cover crops and their impact with tile drainage and nutrient runoff and things like that. So you can always send me an email if any of these sound interesting and you would like to join them. Otherwise, that's all I have, and I'll pass it back to you, Tori.
All right, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, if there's anything else that anybody wants to tell us about, please feel free to drop links in the chat, drop a description in the chat. We can go ahead and go to our next slide. As always, I want to just remind everybody that there is much more to the ICON and ISAP world than just these calls. So please remember to visit the website, dive into the resources section, and see what is new on there. So we're always in the hunt for creating more resources. So if you do have any suggestions of knowledge gaps or areas where the folks that you work with would like to see some additional resources created, please feel free to reach out to any of us on the team. And then I guess we'll close with our exit poll. And if you have any suggestions for future topics for these calls, again, feel free to reach out to any of us on the team. All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and conclude the call for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Special thank you to Anna and Brett for joining us and offering your insights and presentations to us today. Thank you. We'll see everybody hopefully in April in Bloomington.